Well, hello there, my dear friends. Come on in, sit down, and make yourself comfortable. My name is Margaret Louise Henderson, and I'm 73 years old. Today I'm going to share with you the most unexpected, the most unbelievable story of my entire life. A story about 50 years of service, about loyalty that went unrewarded, about a secret that changed everything, and about tears that finally turned from bitter to sweet. Before I start, let me ask you something. Have you ever worked your whole life for someone, given them everything you had, only to realize one day that you deserved so much more? If you have, then this story is for you. And if you haven't, well, stick around, because what I'm about to tell you will make you think twice about the value of your own work, your own worth. I'm sitting here in my living room right now, in my own home, mind you, not someone else's, and I can finally tell this story without fear, without shame, without that weight on my chest that I carried for 5 decades. And let me tell you, it feels like I can finally breathe. So grab yourself a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and let me take you back to where it all began. Back to 1973, in a small town in upstate New York, when I was just 23 years old and thought I had my whole life figured out. Oh, and before I forget, if this story touches your heart, if it makes you feel something deep inside, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I want to reach as many people as possible with this message, especially women like me, women who have spent their lives in service to others. And leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you from New York like me? California? Texas? Maybe you're watching from another country altogether. I'd love to know. Now, let me set the scene for you. The year was 1973. I was 23 years old, fresh out of high school, no college degree, and desperately needing work. My daddy had passed away the year before from a heart attack. He was only 52 years old, can you imagine? Left my mama with 5 kids to raise, and I was the oldest. We lived in a tiny apartment in Rochester, New York, in a neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's business, the kind of place where you could smell Mrs. Johnson's cornbread from 3 doors down, and where Mr. Peterson would sit on his stoop every evening, watching the world go by. My mama, God rest her soul, worked 2 jobs. She cleaned offices at night and worked at the textile factory during the day. I remember the sound of her alarm clock at 4:30 in the morning, that harsh buzzing that would wake the whole house. I'd hear her in the bathroom, getting ready in the dark so she wouldn't wake my younger siblings. Then she'd be gone before the sun came up, and I'd be the one getting everyone ready for school. We didn't have much. Our apartment had 2 bedrooms. Mama had one, and us 5 kids shared the other. The boys had bunk beds on one side, and us 3 girls shared a double bed on the other. I remember how cold that apartment got in the winter. We'd pile every blanket we owned on that bed, and still, I'd wake up with my nose frozen. The radiator would clank and hiss, but barely put out any heat. And in the summer? Forget about it. We'd sleep with the windows wide open, and you could hear everything. Cars passing, neighbors arguing, dogs barking. That was life in our neighborhood. I had dropped out of school after 10th grade to help Mama. I know. It wasn't the smart thing to do, but what choice did I have? We needed money, and I was old enough to work. I'd been doing odd jobs here and there, babysitting for the neighbors, cleaning houses on weekends, working at the corner store when Mr. Ramirez needed extra hands. But none of it was steady. None of it paid enough. That's when I saw the ad in the newspaper. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting at our tiny kitchen table, The one with the wobbly leg that we'd propped up with old phone books. The paper was spread out in front of me, and I was going through the classifieds with a red pen, circling anything that looked promising. Most of the ads wanted secretaries, and I couldn't type. Some wanted factory workers, but Mama said the factories were laying people off, not hiring. And then I saw it. Live-in housekeeper needed for distinguished family. Private room, meals provided, generous salary. Experience preferred, but will train the right candidate. Must be reliable, discreet, and dedicated. The address was for a place called Thornfield Estate, out in the suburbs. I'd heard of that area. That's where the rich people lived. The ones with the big houses and the fancy cars. People like us didn't go out there much, except to work. And that's exactly what this was. A job. A real job with steady pay. And a place to live. I could send money home to Mama and the kids. And I wouldn't be another mouth to feed in that tiny apartment. I called the number right away. My hands were shaking when I dialed. A woman answered, her voice crisp and proper. Not unfriendly, but definitely not warm. She said her name was Mrs. Eleanor Thornfield, and she needed someone to start as soon as possible. Could I come for an interview that very afternoon? I said yes before my brain could catch up with my mouth. Then I panicked. What was I going to wear? I didn't own anything nice. I went through my closet, what little I had, and pulled out the only dress that looked halfway decent. It was a navy blue dress that Mama had bought me from the thrift store for Easter 2 years ago. I pressed it with our old iron, the one that you had to fill with water, and that would spit and hiss at you. I brushed my hair until it shined, pulled it back into a neat ponytail, and I put on the only pair of shoes I had that weren't sneakers or falling apart. Mama came home during her lunch break to wish me luck. She hugged me tight and said, "Margaret, you go in there with your head held high. You're a good girl, a hard worker, and don't you let anybody make you feel less than. You hear me?" I nodded, fighting back tears. I didn't want to leave home, but I knew this was the opportunity we needed. So I got on 2 buses to get out to that suburb, to that address that seemed like it was in another world entirely. And let me tell you, when I finally got there, I understood why they called it an estate. The house, if you could even call it that, was enormous. It was a 3-story brick mansion with white columns in the front, like something you'd see in a magazine or in the movies. The lawn was perfectly manicured, greener than any grass I'd ever seen. There were flower beds with roses in full bloom, and a circular driveway with a fountain in the middle. An actual fountain, with water spouting up from the mouth of a stone dolphin. I stood at the end of that driveway for a full minute, just staring. This was where rich people lived. This was wealth I couldn't even imagine. And I was about to walk up to that front door and ask them to hire me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst right out of my chest. But I thought about Mama, about my siblings, about that cold apartment and the empty refrigerator, and I made myself walk up that driveway. I made myself climb those steps, and I rang the doorbell. The woman who answered the door was Mrs. Eleanor Thornfield herself. She was probably in her mid-40s, tall and elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and pearls around her neck. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than our entire month's rent. She looked me up and down, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. My thrift store dress suddenly felt shabby and cheap. But she smiled, a small, tight smile, and said, "You must be Margaret. Come in." I stepped into that house, and it was like entering a different universe. The entryway had marble floors, actual marble that was so shiny you could see your reflection in it. There was a crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, and a grand staircase with a polished wooden banister that curved up to the second floor. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and there were paintings in gold frames everywhere. Landscapes and portraits and abstract things I didn't understand but knew were expensive. Mrs. Thornfield led me through to the sitting room. Sitting room, not living room. That's what she called it. It had high ceilings, a fireplace with an ornate mantel, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything was cream and gold and pristine. I was afraid to sit down on the sofa she gestured to, worried I might somehow damage it just by touching it. She asked me questions about my experience, which wasn't much, about my family, which I told her honestly, about why I wanted this job. I told her the truth. I needed to help my mama. I needed steady work. I was a hard worker, reliable, and I'd do whatever was needed. She studied me for a long moment, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. Then she said, "The position requires complete discretion. This household values privacy. You would be responsible for cleaning, cooking, laundry, and general household management. My husband, Mr. Richard Thornfield, is a prominent businessman. We entertain frequently. The work would be demanding, but if you prove yourself capable, it could be a long-term position." Long-term. That's what caught my attention. Stability, security, something I could count on. She offered me $150 a week, room and board included. In 1973, that was good money. Real good money. More than Mama made at both her jobs combined. I could send home $100 a week and still have money left over for myself. I took the job on the spot. That very day, Mrs. Thornfield showed me to my room. It was on the 3rd floor, in what used to be the servants' quarters back when the house was first built in the 1920s. It was small, just big enough for a single bed, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. But it was mine, all mine. I didn't have to share it with anyone. There was a tiny bathroom down the hall that I'd share with any other staff, though at that time I was the only live-in employee. The room had a window that looked out over the backyard, and what a backyard it was. There was a swimming pool, a tennis court, and gardens that seemed to go on forever. I remember standing at that window, looking out at all of it, and thinking, this is where I'll be living. This is my life now. That first night I barely slept. The bed was comfortable, more comfortable than any bed I'd ever slept in. But I was too wired, too nervous. I kept thinking about everything I'd have to learn, all the responsibilities I'd have. I didn't want to mess this up. I couldn't mess this up. Too much was riding on it. The next morning started early. Mrs. Thornfield woke me at 5:30 a.m. and gave me a rundown of my daily duties. The family had breakfast at 7:00 a.m. sharp. I was to have it ready by then. Coffee, fresh squeezed orange juice. Eggs, however, they wanted them. Toast, bacon, fruit. Then I'd clean up the kitchen, make the beds, do the laundry, clean the bathrooms, vacuum, dust. She had a schedule for me, a different focus for each day of the week. Mondays were for deep cleaning the kitchen, Tuesdays for the bathrooms, Wednesdays for the bedrooms, and so on. I met Mr. Richard Thornfield that first morning. He was a tall man, probably in his late 40s with dark hair graying at the temples and a stern face. He barely looked at me when his wife introduced me, just grunted a greeting and went back to reading his newspaper while eating his eggs. He was a lawyer, I learned later. A very successful one. He worked at a big firm downtown and was rarely home except for meals and bedtime. They had 3 children. Richard Jr., who was 18 and away at college. Victoria, who was 15, and Catherine, who was 12. The girls still lived at home, and let me tell you, they were a handful. Victoria was the bossy one, always ordering me around like I was invisible except when she needed something. Catherine was quieter, but she had this way of looking at you like you were beneath her, like you were something dirty on the bottom of her shoe. But I did my job. I did it well. I cleaned that house until it sparkled. I cooked meals that Mrs. Thornfield complimented. I kept my head down, stayed out of the way, and did everything that was asked of me and more. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. I sent money home to Mama every week, like clockwork. She'd call me on the phone in the kitchen on Sunday afternoons, my only day off, and she'd tell me how proud she was of me. She'd tell me about my siblings, about how they were doing in school, about the little things happening in the neighborhood. Those phone calls were my lifeline, my connection to the world I'd come from. But as time went on, I started to realize something. This wasn't just a job. This was my whole life. I woke up in that house. I worked in that house. I ate in that house. And I slept in that house. I had one day off a week, and most of the time I was too tired to do anything except sleep. I didn't have friends. I didn't have a social life. I had the Thornfields, and that was it. The years started to blur together. 1973 became 1974. 1974 became 1975. I watched the children grow up. Victoria went off to college, then came back married to a lawyer like her father. Catherine followed a few years later, married a doctor. Richard Jr. took over his father's law practice. They had children of their own, and those children would come to visit their grandparents. And I'd be there, cleaning up after them, cooking for them, serving them. I became part of the furniture, part of the house itself. The Thornfields would have dinner parties, big elaborate affairs with dozens of guests, and I'd be in the kitchen, preparing course after course, cleaning dish after dish. They'd be in the dining room, laughing and talking, drinking expensive wine, and I'd be invisible. Just the help. Just Margaret, the maid. But here's the thing. Here's what I didn't realize for a long, long time. I wasn't just the help. I was the glue that held that house together. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays. I was the one who knew how everyone liked their coffee. I was the one who noticed when something was broken and fixed it. I was the one who kept everything running smoothly, day in and day out, year after year. Mrs. Thornfield started relying on me more and more, not just for cleaning and cooking, but for everything. I'd run errands for her. I'd pick up her dry cleaning, her groceries, her prescriptions. I'd coordinate with the gardener, the pool guy, the repair people. I became her personal assistant, her confidant even, though I never forgot my place. She'd tell me things, complaints about her husband, about her children, about the other women in her social circle, and I'd listen, nodding sympathetically, never offering my own opinion unless asked. Mr. Thornfield barely acknowledged my existence. To him, I was just a fixture like the furniture or the paintings on the wall. He'd bark orders at me sometimes when something wasn't to his liking. "Margaret, this steak is overcooked." "Margaret, why isn't my study dusted?" But mostly, he ignored me, and I preferred it that way. There was something cold about him, something that made me uncomfortable when he was around. The 1980s came and went. I was in my 30s now, and what did I have to show for it? I still lived in that little room on the 3rd floor. I still sent money home to Mama, though my siblings were grown now and had moved out, started families of their own. Mama had retired from her jobs, and the money I sent her was her main source of income. I thought about leaving sometimes, about getting my own place, finding a different job, living my own life. But where would I go? What would I do? I'd been with the Thornfields for over a decade. This was all I knew. And truthfully, I was afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of the unknown. So I stayed. The 1990s were more of the same. I was in my 40s. Mr. Thornfield had a heart attack in 1995, a mild one, but it scared him enough to retire. He and Mrs. Thornfield started spending more time at home, which meant more work for me. More meals to prepare, more messes to clean, more demands on my time. They traveled sometimes, to Europe, to the Caribbean, to visit their children in other cities, and they'd take me with them. Not as a guest, of course, but as their employee. I'd stay in a small room in whatever hotel or villa they rented, and I'd do the same job I did at home. Cook, clean, organize. I saw Paris, but only from the kitchen of a rented apartment. I saw the beaches of the Bahamas, but only from the window while doing laundry. Mama passed away in 1998. She was 72 years old, and her heart just gave out one night in her sleep. I got the call early in the morning, and I remember collapsing in the kitchen, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Mrs. Thornfield gave me a week off to go home for the funeral. A week to bury my mama, to grieve, to say goodbye to the woman who had sacrificed everything for her children. I came back to the Thornfields' house, and it was like nothing had changed, like my world hadn't just been shattered. Mrs. Thornfield expressed her condolences, a brief, "I'm sorry for your loss, Margaret," and then asked if dinner would be ready at the usual time. That's when something inside me started to crack. Just a little, just a hairline fracture. But it was there. The 2000s arrived, and with them came a new century, but my life remained exactly the same. I was in my 50s now. 50 years old, and what did I have? No husband, no children, no home of my own. Just this job, this house, this family that wasn't mine. I started to notice little things, things I'd ignored before, or maybe hadn't wanted to see. The way Mrs. Thornfield would talk about me to her friends, like I wasn't in the room. "Oh, Margaret will take care of that. She's been with us forever. Don't know what we'd do without her." But she'd say it with this tone, this slight condescension, like I was a pet or a particularly useful appliance. The way the grandchildren would leave their toys and messes everywhere, expecting me to clean up after them because that was my job. The way Richard Jr. would snap his fingers at me when he wanted something, like I was a dog. The way Victoria would criticize my cooking, even though she couldn't boil water to save her life. The way Catherine would act like I was invisible until she needed something. I started to feel it. Resentment, anger, bitterness. I'd given these people 30 years of my life, 30 years. And what had they given me? A paycheck, a room, meals. That was it. No gratitude, no real respect, no acknowledgement of the fact that I'd sacrificed my entire life for their comfort. I thought about leaving more and more, but I was 50 years old. Where would I go? Who would hire me? All I knew was housekeeping. And truthfully, I was scared, terrified even. The world had changed so much since I started working for the Thornfields. Computers, the internet, cell phones. It all felt overwhelming and foreign. So I stayed. But that crack inside me, that fracture, it kept growing, slowly, quietly. Until one day, something happened that changed everything. It was 2008. I was 58 years old. I'd been with the Thornfields for 35 years at that point. 35 years of my life given to this family. Mr. Thornfield had been getting worse, more demanding, more critical, more cruel. His health was declining. He'd had another heart attack, a more serious one this time, and it had left him weakened and angry. He took that anger out on everyone around him, but especially on me. I remember one particular day in March. I'd prepared lunch, chicken salad sandwiches on wheat bread, just the way he liked them. But when I brought his plate to him in the sitting room, where he spent most of his days now in his recliner, he took one look at it and threw it across the room. The plate shattered against the wall, chicken salad and broken porcelain everywhere. "This is garbage!" he screamed at me. "You've been cooking for this family for 35 years, and you still can't make a decent sandwich?" I stood there, frozen, humiliated, angry. Mrs. Thornfield was in the room and she just sighed, like this was a minor inconvenience, and said, "Margaret, please clean that up and make him another sandwich." I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk out right then and there. But I didn't. I cleaned up the mess. I made another sandwich. I brought it to him, and he ate it without a word of apology. That night I lay in my bed in my little room on the 3rd floor, and I cried. I cried for that 23-year-old girl who'd walked into this house with hope and determination. I cried for all the years I'd lost. I cried for the life I'd never lived, and I made a decision. I was going to start looking for a way out. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I was going to find a way to leave this place, to start over, to finally live for myself. But then something happened that made everything even more complicated. Mr. Thornfield died. It was September 2008, just 6 months after that incident with the sandwich. Another heart attack, this one massive and fatal. He passed away in his sleep, and just like that, he was gone. The family was devastated, of course. There was a huge funeral, hundreds of people, a service that went on for hours. I cooked for the reception afterward, serving food to all the mourners who came back to the house. I watched Mrs. Thornfield play the role of the grieving widow, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, accepting condolences with grace and dignity. But I knew the truth. Their marriage had been cold for decades. They'd stayed together for appearances, for the sake of the family legacy. But there was no love there. Maybe there had been once, a long time ago, but not in the years I'd known them. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, Mrs. Thornfield called me into the sitting room. She was still dressed in her black dress and pearls, looking exhausted and small, in a way I'd never seen her before. She said, "Margaret, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for this family, especially now. During this difficult time, I honestly don't know what I would do without you." I nodded, waiting for whatever was coming next. She continued, "Now that Richard is gone, things are going to change around here. The children think I should sell the house, move into something smaller, maybe a condo. But I don't want to leave. This is my home. I've lived here for almost 50 years. But I can't maintain it by myself. I need you, Margaret. I need you to stay with me. Will you? Will you stay?" And what did I say? I said yes. Of course I said yes, because that's what I'd been doing for 35 years, saying yes, putting their needs before my own, being loyal, reliable, dedicated. But that crack inside me, it was growing wider. The next few years were strange. The house felt different without Mr. Thornfield, emptier, quieter. Mrs. Thornfield became more dependent on me than ever. I wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. I was her companion, her caretaker, her everything. She started having health problems of her own. Arthritis, high blood pressure, early signs of memory issues. She'd forget things, repeat herself, get confused about what day it was. I'd help her with her medications, remind her of her appointments, drive her to her doctor's visits. The children didn't visit as often as they should have. They were busy with their own lives, their own families, their own problems. Richard Jr. was dealing with a messy divorce. Victoria's husband had lost his job in the 2008 financial crisis. Catherine had moved to California and rarely came back east. So it was just me and Mrs. Thornfield, rattling around in that big house. She started talking to me more. Really talking. Not just giving orders or making complaints, but actual conversations. She'd tell me about her childhood, about her parents, about how she'd met Mr. Thornfield. She'd talk about her regrets, things she wished she'd done differently. And in those moments, I'd see her as a person, not just as my employer. A lonely, aging woman who'd spent her whole life maintaining appearances, and now, at the end, had nothing to show for it but an empty house and children who couldn't be bothered to visit. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she'd do something, say something, that would remind me of exactly who she was and what my place in her life really was. Like the time in 2012 when I turned 62 years old. I'd been with the Thornfields for 39 years, almost 4 decades. Mrs. Thornfield had thrown a little party for me, invited the children and grandchildren over. There was a cake, presents, the whole thing. I was touched, truly touched. I thought maybe, finally, they saw me. They valued me. And then, at the end of the party, Richard Jr. pulled me aside. He handed me an envelope and said, "This is from all of us. A little something extra, to show our appreciation." I opened it later, in my room. It was a check for $500. $500 for 39 years of service. I stared at that check for a long time, and I realized something. To them, I wasn't family. I wasn't even really a person. I was an employee, a loyal, long-serving employee, but an employee nonetheless, and $500 was what they thought those 39 years were worth. That crack inside me, it split wide open. I started thinking seriously about my future. I was 62 years old. I could retire, technically. I'd been putting money into Social Security all these years, and I'd have a small pension from that. But it wouldn't be much, certainly not enough to live on comfortably. I'd saved some money over the years, but not nearly enough. I'd spent most of my earnings sending money home to Mama when she was alive, and then helping my siblings when they needed it. I had no home of my own, no property, no investments, nothing. After 39 years of work, I had nothing to show for it. And that's when I started paying attention to something I'd heard the children talking about. The house. This house. The Thornfield estate. It was worth a fortune. Millions of dollars. The land alone was worth over $2 million, and the house itself was probably worth another $1 million or more. It was prime real estate, in a desirable area, a historic property. The children wanted Mrs. Thornfield to sell it. They'd been pressuring her for years. But she refused. She wanted to live here until she died, she said. This was her home. But here's the thing I learned, quite by accident. I was helping Mrs. R. Thornfield organize some paperwork one day in 2013, sorting through old documents and files. And I found something interesting. The deed to the house. And on that deed, there was something that caught my eye. The house wasn't just in Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield's names. There was a clause added decades ago, in the 1970s, right after I started working there. It stated that in the event of both Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield's passing, if certain conditions were met, the property would be transferred to the primary household employee who has served the family for a minimum of 25 consecutive years. I read that clause over and over again, my heart pounding. Could this be real? Was this actually in the deed? I looked at the date. It had been added in 1975, just 2 years after I started working there. Why? Why would they do that? I thought about it for days, and then I remembered something. In 1975, Mrs. Thornfield's mother had passed away and left her a substantial inheritance. Mrs. Thornfield had used some of that money to make improvements to the house, and apparently, she'd also had some legal work done. I vaguely remembered her mentioning something about updating their will and estate planning. Had she included this clause as some sort of insurance to make sure that whoever was taking care of them in their old age would be motivated to stay, to be loyal? Or had it been genuine gratitude, a promise that if someone dedicated their life to this family, they'd be rewarded? I didn't know. But what I did know was that this clause was there, in black and white, legally binding. And I'd been working for the Thornfields for 40 years. I'd met the requirement 10 times over. But there was a problem. The clause only took effect upon the death of both Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield. Mr. Thornfield was gone, but Mrs. Thornfield was still alive, and she could change the deed at any time. She could remove that clause. She could sell the house. She could do anything she wanted. And her children, if they knew about this clause, which I suspected they didn't, they'd make sure it was removed the second they found out. They wanted this house sold so they could split the money. They wouldn't want it going to the Maid. I didn't say anything to Mrs. Thornfield about what I'd found. I just quietly made a copy of that deed and kept it in my room, hidden away. And I started planning. Now, let me be clear about something. I'm not a dishonest person. I'm not a schemer. I'd spent 40 years being loyal, being honest, being trustworthy. But I'd also spent 40 years being taken advantage of, being undervalued, being used. And I realized something. If I didn't take control of my own future, no one else would. The Thornfields certainly weren't going to take care of me. They'd proven that over and over again, so I had to take care of myself. Mrs. Thornfield's health continued to decline. By 2015, she was 86 years old and showing clear signs of dementia. She'd forget where she was sometimes, call me by the wrong name, ask for her husband who'd been dead for 7 years. The children still barely visited. They'd call occasionally, ask how their mother was doing, but they didn't come around. I was her full-time caretaker now. I'd help her bathe, dress, eat. I'd manage all her medications, all her appointments. I'd keep the house running, pay the bills, handle everything. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. But I kept going, because I had a plan now. I had hope. In 2017, something happened that accelerated everything. Mrs. Thornfield had a stroke, a significant one. It left her partially paralyzed and even more confused. The hospital wanted to send her to a nursing home, but the children insisted she come back to the house. And who did they expect to take care of her? Me, of course. I brought her home, and I cared for her, day and night. It was the hardest work I'd ever done. She needed constant attention, constant care. She couldn't walk without assistance. She could barely speak. She didn't recognize me half the time. The children came to visit once, right after she got out of the hospital. They stayed for a few hours, made sympathetic noises, and then left, relieved that I was there to handle everything. They didn't offer to help. They didn't offer to hire additional care. They just left it all to me. And that's when I knew. I knew that when Mrs. Thornfield passed away, they'd swoop in, sell this house, pocket the money, and send me on my way with maybe another $500 check and a pat on the back. 44 years of service, and that's all I'd get. So I started researching. Late at night, After Mrs. Thornfield was asleep, I'd sit at the old desktop computer in Mr. Thornfield's former study and teach myself things I'd never known before. I learned about property law, about deeds, about estate planning. I read everything I could find about that clause in the deed, about what it meant, about whether it was still valid. And I found something interesting. That clause was indeed legally binding. It was what's called a life estate with remainder interest. It meant that as long as Mrs. Thornfield was alive, she owned the property. But upon her death, if the conditions were met, which they absolutely were in my case, the property would transfer to me automatically. It wouldn't go through probate. It wouldn't be part of her estate. It would just be mine. But here was the crucial part. The deed had to remain unchanged for this to work. And Mrs. Thornfield, even with her dementia, still had the legal authority to change it. If the children convinced her to modify the deed, or if they discovered the clause and pushed her to remove it, I'd lose everything. I also discovered something else. Mrs. Thornfield had given me power of attorney 2 years earlier, in 2015, right before her stroke. She'd done it on the advice of her lawyer, who'd said that someone needed to be able to handle her affairs if she became incapacitated. And since the children were too busy, and I was the one managing everything already, it made sense for it to be me. At the time, I'd seen it as just another responsibility, another burden. But now, I realized what it really meant. With that power of attorney, I could handle all of her legal and financial affairs. I could pay her bills, manage her accounts, make decisions on her behalf. Within certain legal limits, of course. I couldn't just steal her money or give myself bonuses, but I could make sure that things stayed exactly as they were. I could make sure that deed remained unchanged. And that's exactly what I did. I became fiercely protective of all of Mrs. Thornfield's legal documents. When Richard Jr. called and said he wanted to review his mother's estate planning, I told him everything was in order and that his mother's lawyer had everything under control. When Victoria suggested it might be time to put the house on the market just to see what it's worth, I told her that her mother had specifically stated she never wanted to sell and that we should honor her wishes. I wasn't lying, exactly. Mrs. Thornfield had said those things years ago. I was just protecting those wishes, protecting my future. The months passed. Mrs. Thornfield's condition didn't improve. If anything, she got worse. By late 2017, she was mostly bedridden. She slept most of the day. When she was awake, she was confused, sometimes agitated. She didn't recognize anyone anymore, not even her own children. The children visited for Thanksgiving that year, all 3 of them, with their families. The house was full of people for the first time in years. I cooked a huge meal, a traditional Thanksgiving feast with all the trimmings. Turkey stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, the works. They all sat around the dining room table, eating and laughing and talking. Mrs. Thornfield was in her room, too unwell to join them. And where was I? In the kitchen, as always. Serving, cleaning, staying out of sight. After dinner, I heard them talking in the sitting room. I was cleaning up, and the door was partially open. They didn't know I could hear them. Richard Jr. was saying, "We really need to think about selling this place. Mom's not going to get any better. She probably doesn't have much time left. And when she goes, we're going to have to deal with all of this. The house, the estate, everything. It would be so much easier if we just sold it now, while we can." Victoria agreed. "I know Mom always said she wanted to stay here, but she doesn't even know where she is anymore. We could put her in a really nice facility, top-of-the-line care, and still have money left over from the sale. Catherine, always the practical one, said, "But who's going to take care of all of that? The selling process, the moving, dealing with Mom? I certainly don't have time. My practice is crazy right now." There was a pause. Then Richard Jr. said, "Margaret will handle it. She always does. She's been doing everything for years anyway. We'll just tell her what needs to be done, and she'll do it." That's when Victoria said something that made my blood boil. She laughed, a light, dismissive laugh, and said, "Honestly, I don't know what we'd do without her. She's like, I don't know, like a really reliable piece of furniture. Always there, always working, never complaining. We should probably give her a nice bonus or something when this is all over. Maybe $1 or $2. That seems generous for all her years of service, don't you think?" They all agreed. "Pardon, $1,000 for 44 years of my life, for raising their children when they were too busy, for taking care of their mother when they couldn't be bothered, for sacrificing everything I could have been, everything I could have had. $1 or $100. I stood in that kitchen, dish towel in my hands, and I made a decision. I was going to let that deed stand. I was going to make sure nothing changed, and when Mrs. Thornfield passed away, which the doctors said could be any day now, or could be months, or even years, I was going to claim what was legally mine. Not because I was greedy, not because I was vengeful, but because I deserved it. I'd earned it. Every single day of those 44 years, I'd earned it. Now here's where the planning really began. I knew I had to be smart about this. I couldn't just wait for Mrs. Thornfield to pass away and then announce that the house was mine. The children would fight it. They'd lawyer up. They'd claim I'd manipulated their mother, that the deed was invalid, that I'd somehow tricked the family. I needed to make sure everything was absolutely airtight. So I hired my own lawyer. A good one. I used some of the money I'd saved over the years, money I'd been setting aside for retirement. I met with her in secret during my few hours off. Her name was Jessica Chen, and she was a property lawyer with a small practice in downtown Rochester. I brought her the copy of the deed, explained the situation, and asked her to review everything to make sure it was all legal and enforceable. She studied the documents for weeks. She researched the property law, the specific language of the clause, the history of the deed. And finally, in January 2018, she called me into her office and said, "Margaret, this is absolutely legitimate. That clause is legally binding. When Mrs. Thornfield passes away, if you're still employed as the primary household employee, and you've met the 25-year service requirement, which you clearly have many times over, the house transfers to you automatically. It's what's called a deed with remainder interest, and it's completely enforceable." I felt a wave of relief so powerful I almost cried right there in her office. "But what about the children?" I asked. "What if they fight it?" Jessica nodded. "They probably will fight it. They're going to be shocked, and they're going to be angry. But here's the thing. The deed is the deed. It's a legal document, filed with the county, and it's been in place for over 40 years. They can't just ignore it or wish it away. Now, they could potentially claim that you unduly influenced Mrs. Thornfield or that you somehow manipulated the situation. But given that this clause was put in place 43 years ago, long before anyone could have predicted the current situation, that argument won't hold water." She continued, "What you need to do is document everything. Keep records of all your work, all your responsibilities. Make sure you have proof that you've been continuously employed as the primary household employee all these years. Pay stubs, W-2 forms, anything that shows your employment history with the family. And when the time comes, when Mrs. Thornfield passes away, you need to be prepared to act quickly." "What do you mean, act quickly?" I asked. "I mean, you need to file the deed transfer with the county immediately, before the family even knows what's happening. Because once it's filed and processed, it's done. The house is yours. They can contest it all they want, but possession is 9/10 of the law, and if you're already the legal owner, they'll have a much harder time taking it away from you." I left her office that day with a plan, a real, concrete plan, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I had some control over my life, like I was making my own decisions instead of just following orders. I spent the next few months preparing. I gathered all my employment records. I had pay stubs going back to 1973, W-2 forms, tax returns, everything. I made copies of everything and gave them to Jessica for safekeeping. I also documented my current responsibilities, keeping a daily log of everything I did for Mrs. Thornfield. The medications I administered, the meals I prepared, the care I provided, everything. I was meticulous, because I knew that when this all came to light, I'd need to prove, beyond any doubt, that I deserved what I was claiming. Mrs. Thornfield's health continued to decline throughout 2018. By summer, she was barely conscious most of the time. The hospice nurses who came to check on her said it was just a matter of time now, weeks, maybe days. The children came to visit more frequently, sensing the end was near. They'd sit by her bedside for a few minutes, hold her hand, say a few words, and then leave. They'd ask me to keep them updated, to call them if there were any changes. And I did. I was the dutiful employee, right up until the end. I never gave them any reason to suspect what was coming. I was kind, helpful, sympathetic. I made them coffee, prepared meals, made sure they were comfortable, just like I'd been doing for 45 years. I remember one particular conversation I had with Richard Jr. in August 2018. He pulled me aside after visiting his mother and said, "Margaret, I want you to know that we really appreciate everything you've done for our mother, for our family. When this is all over, we're going to make sure you're taken care of. We'll help you find a new position, write you excellent references, and of course, we'll give you a generous severance package." I smiled and said, "Thank you, Mr. Richard. That's very kind of you." Inside, I was thinking, you have no idea what's about to happen. September came. Mrs. Thornfield had been in a coma-like state for 2 weeks. The hospice nurses said it wouldn't be long now. Her body was shutting down. It was just a matter of time. I sat with her every day, holding her hand, talking to her even though I didn't know if she could hear me. I told her about the weather, about what I'd made for lunch, about the birds in the garden. Silly, mundane things. But I also told her thank you. Thank you for giving me a job all those years ago. Thank you for the stability, for the security. Even if the family had taken me for granted, even if they'd undervalued me, she'd still given me something when I desperately needed it. I'd never forget that. Even now, even with everything that was about to happen, I'd never forget that moment in 1973 when she opened her door to a scared, desperate 23-year-old girl and gave her a chance. On September 17th, 2018, at 3:47 in the morning, Eleanor Thornfield took her last breath. I was sitting in the chair next to her bed, and I watched the life leave her body. It was peaceful, quiet. She just stopped breathing. I sat there for a moment, holding her hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the end of an era, the end of 45 years, and the beginning of something new. I called the hospice nurse, who came and officially pronounced her dead. Then I called the children, one by one, and told them their mother had passed away. They all said they'd come to the house first thing in the morning, and then I called Jessica Chen. It was 4:30 in the morning, but she'd told me to call her immediately when it happened, no matter what time it was. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert. "Margaret?" "She passed away about 45 minutes ago," I said. "Okay," Jessica said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm coming to the house right now. We're going to file the deed transfer electronically with the county clerk's office as soon as they open at 9:00 a.m. I've already prepared all the paperwork. We just need to submit it, and then, Margaret, the house is yours. Legally, officially, yours." "What if the children try to stop it?" I asked. "They can't. Not once it's filed. They can contest it, but that will take months, maybe years, and they won't win. Trust me on this. You've done nothing wrong. You're claiming what's legally yours according to the deed. Now, are you ready for this? Because once we file, there's no going back. The children are going to be furious. This is going to get ugly." I took a deep breath. Was I ready? I thought about 45 years of service, 45 years of being invisible, being taken for granted, being undervalued, 45 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. 45 years of watching my life pass me by while I lived in a house that wasn't mine, serving a family that wasn't mine. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Jessica arrived at the house at 6:00 a.m. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals, and she went over the paperwork with me one more time. Everything was in order. The deed transfer documents were ready. All we had to do was wait for 9:00 a.m., and then we'd file them electronically. The children started arriving around 8:00 a.m. Richard Jr. came first, his face drawn and tired. Victoria came next, crying dramatically. Catherine arrived last, looking more annoyed than sad, like this whole thing was an inconvenience. They went upstairs to see their mother's body. I heard them crying, talking in low voices. I stayed in the kitchen with Jessica, waiting. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Jessica pulled out her laptop and filed the deed transfer with the Monroe County Clerk's office. It took less than 5 minutes, a few clicks, a digital signature, and it was done. The Thornfield estate, the house I'd lived in for 45 years, the house I'd cleaned and maintained and cared for, was now legally mine. Jessica looked at me and said, "Congratulations, Margaret. You're a homeowner." I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt strange, unmoored, like I'd just stepped off a ledge and was waiting to see if I'd fall or fly. The funeral arrangements took up most of the morning. Richard Jr. was making calls, coordinating with the funeral home, planning the service. Victoria was going through her mother's closet, looking for an appropriate outfit to bury her in. Catherine was in the study, starting to go through paperwork. At around 2:00 p.m., Catherine called everyone into the sitting room. She'd found the deed to the house and she was holding it, a confused expression on her face. "Does anyone know about this clause?" she asked, pointing to a section of the document. Richard Jr. took the deed and read it. His face went pale. "What the hell is this? It says the house transfers to the primary household employee who has served the family for a minimum of 25 consecutive years upon Mom's death. Was this always in here?" Victoria grabbed the deed and read it herself. "This can't be right. Why would Mom and Dad put something like this in the deed?" They all looked at each other, and then slowly, they looked at me. I was standing in the doorway of the sitting room, Jessica beside me. Richard Jr. said, "Margaret, did you know about this?" I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I did. And I also want you to know that as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, the deed transfer was filed with the county clerk's office. This house now legally belongs to me." You could have heard a pin drop. The silence in that room was absolute. They all just stared at me, their mouths open, like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Then Richard Jr. exploded. "What? You can't be serious. You can't just take our mother's house. This is our family home." Victoria was crying, but now it was angry crying. "You can't do this. We'll fight this. We'll sue you." Catherine, always the most level-headed, said, "This has to be some kind of mistake or fraud. You must have manipulated our mother, changed the deed somehow." Jessica stepped forward. "I'm Jessica Chen, Mrs. Henderson's attorney, and I can assure you, everything that's been done is completely legal. That clause has been in the deed since 1975, long before any of you could claim Mrs. Henderson had any influence over your mother. The deed transfer is filed and processed. The house belongs to Margaret now." Richard Jr. turned to me, his face red with rage. "You've been planning this, haven't you? All these years, you've been waiting for our mother to die so you could steal our house." I felt anger rise up in me, anger that had been building for 45 years. "Steal your house? I've given 45 years of my life to this family. I raised your children when you were too busy. I took care of your mother when you couldn't be bothered to visit. I've cleaned, cooked, served, sacrificed everything for this family. And what did you give me? A paycheck? A room? And a promise of $1 when it was all over?" Victoria gasped. "How do you know about that?" "I heard you," I said. "Last Thanksgiving. You were in this room, talking about how I was like a reliable piece of furniture. About how you'd give me a generous bonus of $1,000 for my 44 years of service. Well, guess what? Your parents apparently valued me more than you do. They put that clause in the deed 45 years ago, and I'm claiming what's legally mine." Richard Jr. was shaking with anger. "We're going to fight this. We're going to take you to court. You're not going to get away with this." Jessica spoke up calmly. "You can certainly try to contest it. But I should warn you, the deed is clear. The clause has been in place for over 40 years, and Margaret has documentation proving she's been continuously employed as your primary household employee all that time. Any legal challenge would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately unsuccessful. But if you want to waste your money on lawyers, that's your choice." Catherine was staring at me with a look of pure hatred. "After everything we did for you. We gave you a home, a job. We treated you like family. That's what broke me. That's what made me laugh. A bitter, harsh laugh. Like family? You treated me like a servant, because that's what I was to you. I was never family. I was the help. And now, the help owns the house. You can stay for the funeral arrangements, but after that, I want you out. This is my home now." They left that day. All of them. Sputtering threats and accusations. They called me a thief, a manipulator, a con artist. They said they'd sue me, that they'd make sure I never got away with this. But as Jessica had predicted, there was nothing they could do. The deed was the deed. The law was the law, and I had followed it to the letter. The funeral was held a week later. It was a tense, uncomfortable affair. The children barely spoke to me. When they did, it was with cold politeness, the kind you'd give a stranger you despised. Other family members, friends of the Thornfields, who didn't know what had happened, treated me the same as always, with vague dismissiveness. But I held my head high. I was no longer their employee. I was a homeowner. I was a woman who'd taken control of her own life, finally, after 45 years. After the funeral, after everyone had left, I walked through the house alone, my house. I walked through every room, really seeing it for the first time not as something I had to clean, but as something that was mine. The sitting room with its cream and gold furniture, the dining room with its long table where I'd served thousands of meals, the kitchen where I'd spent so many hours, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the study, and my own room, that small room on the 3rd floor that had been my entire world for so long. I stood at the window in that room, looking out over the backyard, the pool, the gardens, the tennis court, all of it mine, legally, officially mine. And I cried. I cried for that 23-year-old girl who'd walked into this house with nothing but hope and determination. I cried for all the years I'd lost. I cried for the life I'd never lived. But I also cried tears of relief, of joy, of freedom. Because for the first time in 45 years, I was free. The next few months were difficult. The children did try to contest the deed transfer, just as they'd threatened. They hired a lawyer, filed a lawsuit, claimed that I'd manipulated their mother, that the deed was invalid, that I'd stolen their inheritance. But Jessica was right. They didn't have a case. The deed was clear. The clause had been in place since 1975. I had documentation proving my continuous employment, and most importantly, I hadn't done anything illegal. I'd simply claimed what was legally mine. The lawsuit dragged on for about 6 months before their lawyer advised them to drop it. They were wasting money on legal fees, and they weren't going to win. So, in March 2019, they officially dropped the case. I haven't heard from any of them since. They want nothing to do with me. And honestly, that's fine. I spent 45 years living for them, caring about what they thought, what they needed. I don't need to do that anymore. So what did I do with the house? Well, that's the interesting part. At first, I thought about keeping it, living in it, enjoying all that space for myself. After all, I'd earned it. But the truth is, it was too big, too full of memories, too much a reminder of all those years of service. And the property taxes were astronomical. I couldn't afford to keep it, not on my Social Security and the small pension I had. So in May 2019, I put it on the market. The real estate agent told me it was worth $3.2 million. I nearly fainted when she said that. The house sold in less than a month. A young couple with 3 kids bought it, paid cash. When we closed on the sale in June 2019, I walked away with just over $3 million after taxes, fees, and Jessica's legal costs. $3 million. For a 68-year-old woman who'd never had more than a few $1,000s in her bank account at any one time, it was an incomprehensible amount of money. The first thing I did was buy myself a house, a small, beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood in Rochester. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a nice kitchen, a little garden. Nothing fancy, nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable, manageable home that was mine, truly mine. I paid cash for it, $250,000, and I still had almost $3 million left. Then I set up trust funds for my nieces and nephews, my siblings' children. Not huge amounts, but enough to help with college, with starting their lives, with whatever they needed. They'd always been good to me, always treated me with respect. I wanted to help them the way I'd wished someone had helped me when I was young. I donated a significant amount to a nonprofit that helps older women who are trying to start over, who need job training, housing assistance, support. Because I know how lucky I was. That deed, that clause, that was a lottery ticket. Most women in my situation don't have that. Most women who spend their lives in service end up with nothing. And then I started living, really living. For the first time in my life, I started doing things for myself. I traveled. Not as someone's employee, not to cook and clean in a hotel room, but as a tourist. I went to Hawaii and actually got to walk on the beach. I went to Europe and toured museums and cafes, not kitchens. I went to the Caribbean and swam in the ocean. I took classes, painting, pottery, photography. Things I'd always wanted to try but never had the time or money for. I joined a book club, made friends, real friends who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I learned how to rest, how to sleep in late without guilt, how to spend a day doing absolutely nothing without feeling like I was wasting time, how to cook for myself, meals I wanted to eat, not meals someone else demanded. And slowly, over the months and years, I healed. That crack inside me, that fracture that had been growing for so long, it started to close. The bitterness, the resentment, the anger, it started to fade. Not completely. I don't think it will ever completely go away. But enough that I could breathe. Enough that I could be happy. Now, here I am. It's 2025 now. I'm 73 years old. I've been living my own life, on my own terms, for 6 years. And let me tell you, these have been the best years of my life. I won't lie and say that I don't sometimes think about those 45 years I lost. I do. I think about the life I could have lived if I'd been braver, if I'd left sooner, if I'd stood up for myself earlier. I think about the relationships I never had, the experiences I missed, the dreams I put aside. But I also know that I can't change the past. All I can do is live the present and plan for the future. I'm dating someone now. Can you believe that? At 73 years old, I'm dating. His name is Robert, and he's 75. He's a retired teacher, a widower, kind and funny and gentle. We met at my book club, of all places. We've been seeing each other for about a year now, and it's nice. It's comfortable. It's what I always imagined a relationship could be. He knows my story. I told him everything, and he didn't judge me. He said I was brave. He said I did what I had to do, and he's proud of me for taking control of my life. I think about getting married sometimes, not for practical reasons, not because I need someone to take care of me, but because I want to, because I love him, because I want to share my life with someone, truly share it, as an equal partner. I never thought I'd have this. Love, companionship, happiness. I thought I'd missed my chance, that I was too old, that it was too late. But it's not too late. It's never too late. I want to tell you something important, especially if you're a woman listening to this, especially if you're a woman who's spent her life in service to others. Whether you're taking care of your family, working a job that undervalues you, staying in a relationship that doesn't serve you, whatever your situation is, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand what you deserve. It's never too late to start over. I was 68 years old when my life really began. 68. Most people would say that's the end of life, not the beginning. But for me, that's when everything changed. That's when I finally became the person I was always meant to be. You don't have to spend 45 years being undervalued. You don't have to wait for a miracle clause in a deed to save you. You can start making changes today. Small changes, big changes, whatever you can manage. But start, because your life is precious. Your time is precious. and you deserve to spend it living for yourself, not just existing for others. I know it's scary. Believe me, I know. Change is terrifying. The unknown is terrifying. But you know what's more terrifying? Getting to the end of your life and realizing you never really lived it. Realizing you spent all your years serving others and never served yourself. Don't let that happen to you. Don't wait as long as I did. Be brave. Be bold. Take that first step, whatever that step is for you. And if you're older, if you think it's too late, if you think you've missed your chance, I'm here to tell you that you haven't. I'm living proof that it's never too late. I'm 73 years old, and I'm just getting started. Before I go, I want to say something to anyone out there who's in a situation like I was. Anyone who's been working for a family, caring for someone, giving their all, and feeling undervalued and underappreciated. Know your worth, understand your value, and protect yourself. Make sure you're getting what you deserve, legally and ethically. Make sure you're not just taking people at their word when they promise to take care of you later. Get things in writing, save your money, plan for your future, because no one else is going to do it for you. I got lucky. That clause in the deed saved me. But most people won't have that. Most people have to save themselves. So start saving yourself now. Don't wait. Don't hope. Take action. And to the Thornfield children, if you're somehow hearing this, I want you to know something. I don't hate you. I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a long time. But I've let that go. You were products of your upbringing, of your privilege, of a system that taught you that people like me were less than. You never learned to value the people who served you because you never had to. But I hope you learned something from this. I hope you learned that every person has worth, has dignity, has rights. I hope you treat your own employees, your own helpers, with more respect than you treated me. I hope you see them as human beings, not as furniture. And if you can't do that, well, then I hope karma finds you the way it found me, because what goes around comes around. To everyone else listening, thank you for staying with me through this long story. Thank you for listening to an old woman ramble about her life. I hope it meant something to you. I hope it inspired you, or encouraged you, or at least made you think. If you enjoyed this story, if it touched your heart, please give this video a like. Subscribe to this channel because there are so many more stories like mine out there. Stories of women who found their strength later in life, who took control of their destinies, who refused to be invisible anymore. Leave me a comment and tell me what you thought. Tell me your own story. If you feel comfortable, let's create a community of women supporting women, encouraging each other, lifting each other up. And remember, it's never too late. It's never too late to be happy. It's never too late to be free. It's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And may you all find the courage to live the life you deserve. My name is Margaret Louise Henderson. I was their maid for 50 years. I sold the house in secret, and now I cry tears of joy. God bless you all.